Inflation rips to a new 40-year high, levels that we haven't seen since Ronald Reagan was president. Now, what does this mean? But more importantly, what comes next? Well, those are things that we're going to take a look at, but it's important to understand, first of all, what the data is that we're even looking at. If you're watching mainstream media news, which you're probably not if you're watching me, then you're probably being told that it's, Putin's fault. They're calling it the Putin price hike. It's the war on Ukraine, right? They're probably trying to tell you that, but is that true? We're going to take a look at that. We're also going to look at what comes next. So first thing, let me just show you what I'm looking at right here. You can see on my screen. Here we have U.S. inflation leaps to 8.5%. per the CPI, or as I like to call it, the CPI. And the reason why I like to say that is because the numbers that are used to calculate this are so heavily manipulated that they're basically showing you whatever they want to show you, and it's not the real numbers. We're going to dig into that. Let's go ahead and take a look at this report here. So we can see the numbers. It says the rate of U.S. inflation leapt to a 40-year high of 8.5% in March and showed little sign of easing up, explaining the newfound urgency at the Federal Reserve to quickly undo its easy money strategy. And at the same time, UK inflation climbed to new 30-year high. So what I like about this is it actually calls it out, where it says that it's urging the Federal Reserve to end its easy money strategy. What does that mean, easy money? Well, since 2008, we've been in this aggressive monetary easing, quantitative easing, if you will, where the Fed has been buying their own treasuries, buying their own debt issuance, as well as injecting money into the markets, bond issuance, etc. That's what quantitative easing is. And so we've been doing that, and these are easy money policies, just letting money flow out, rapidly expanding the monetary base. Of course, if you've been watching this channel, you know that in the last 2 years, we've expanded the monetary base by over 40%. And that's what we're talking about, easy money policy. Now, the reason why I like this is because what you're seeing on the news from the Biden administration, specifically out of Jen Psaki's mouth, is she's saying that it's because of the war. It's because of Putin. Or even Biden straight up told us that it's because of the sanctions that we've put on Russia. So, for example, because Russia is a bad guy and they're a bad actor, then the U.S. has to sanction them. And all the American people, the 330 million Americans that live in the United States, also must suffer. The 330 million Americans must pay higher prices for food, energy, rent, etc., because Putin's a bad guy. I don't know if that's if that's a fair trade. I mean, I'm against war. I certainly don't want any country attacking another country. I certainly don't want people to die. I don't have enough information to pick and choose winners. Russia and Ukraine are both dictators as far as I'm concerned. So it's not like we're standing up for freedom and democracy. But regardless of the situation, the facts, basically the Biden administration is telling you that you have to pay much higher prices because we're sanctioning Russia. But let's dig into that and see if that's even true. Now, if we dig in a little bit further, I want to show you a couple points here. You can see on the screen right here, it says that the last time inflation topped 8% was January 1982 when Ronald Reagan was president. All right, so if we look at that, for example, so that's the highest it's been in over 40 years since Ronald Reagan was president. However, when we talk about the history of the current monetary system that we have over the last 100 years, the highest point of inflation we've ever had was at that point. And it was specifically caused by coming off of the gold standard. So when the dollar was backed by gold, the Federal Reserve couldn't just print as many dollars as it wanted because they had to be backed by gold. But in 1971, when Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard, what do you think happened? The Federal Reserve printed massive amounts of new money. And then what happened? Well, we had a massive amount of inflation. As a matter of fact, it was the record amount of inflation. So we have the same amount of inflation, not seen since 1982 when Reagan was president, and we have the same reason, which was massive amounts of monetary stimulus or money supply. If we jump back in and we look at this, it says one possible sign inflation might be close to peaking, however, was the smallest increase in 6 months in the so-called core rate of inflation that strips out food and energy. So the two things that we have to have, if you were going to cut anything out of your family's budget, you would cut a lot of things out before you cut out food and energy. You pretty much need to keep the lights on at your house, right? You might even be willing to let your water go out before you let your electricity go out. We have to have energy. You got to put gas in your car to drive to work, and you have to eat. I don't have to tell you how important that is. So if we take out the two most important things, food and energy, then it rose at a slower rate. So that looks good, right? I mean, come on, that's just ridiculous. If we jump back in and look at this report here, we can see that the key details here shows the cost of gasoline leapt 18% in March. And of course, you need to put gas in your car. And it says that the Russian invasion of Ukraine drove oil prices to a 13-year high, but the cost of fuel had already risen sharply before the war. That's a good point. I want to dig into that here. And they expect it to remain high as the summer driving season continues. Now, real quick about that, I mean, obviously inflation hurts the poor the worse. The people, the less money you have, the more this affects you. You know, I live in Southern California, and in the big city here, Los Angeles has gotten very expensive, and so people can't afford to live in Los Angeles, and so they've moved out to the suburbs. And so the traffic is a nightmare because people are commuting into the city every day, sometimes upwards of an hour each way into the city. So that means that they're driving very far to get to work, which means they have to put a lot of gas into their car. And so gas adversely affects those low-income people because they've had to move so far. They have to use so much gas. If you're richer and you can afford to live in the city, then you don't even drive so much. So that's one way that affects us. If we jump back in here, look at this article, we can see that the cost of rent and housing both rose 4% in March and continue to march higher. And it says that here, over the past year, the cost of shelter has climbed 5% to mark the largest increase in 40 years. Really? Is that really what they're going to tell us, that the cost of shelter has climbed 5%? So they're telling us that because of the war, oil's gone up, that's driven gas up. They're telling us that housing, shelter has gone up by 5%. Let's take a look at that, because I want to dig in and see if that's even accurate. So let's dig in here. First of all, I have this chart here on the screen. I showed this recently in another video. Talking about, is Putin really to blame for oil and gas hikes? We'll go ahead and link that up here if we can, editor. But you can see right here, I've put this green line right here. This was the time when Biden took office. When he was elected president. And the reason why I've chosen this date and not when he took office, it was in November of 2020, is because the markets are anticipating, we call them discounting mechanisms. You're trying to buy something cheaper today, a share of Tesla or Microsoft or whatever. You're trying to buy it cheaper today than you think it will be in the future. It's a discounting mechanism. It allows me to buy it cheaper. So what happens is, as soon as Biden was elected, everybody knew that he'd be hard on natural energy and he would be pro-green energy. If Trump won, he would be pro-US energy. And so as soon as he won in November, you can see the price had remained pretty flat. As you can see from this green line, you can see how flat that is. And it instantly started taking off, as you can see. All right, now this other green line that I have up here is when the Russia-Ukraine conflict happened. Now what we can see by zooming in is that, yes, the price of oil did shoot way higher after that happened. But what we can see here is that the price of oil is back down to where it was pre-Russia-Ukraine conflict. So for them to blame the price of oil, which of course leads to the price of gas, on this is absolutely absurd. You can see that we're up 126% since that time. All right, now let's take a look at another chart. All right, here we can see, here's the cost of gasoline nationally. So if I go back to this point that I'm highlighting on the screen, you can see this is November in 2021. If we go all the way back to when Biden was elected, that'd be here in November of 2020. So we can see gas had remained pretty flat, because, of course, as I said, oil was pretty flat. And right here, we can just see the price of gasoline just skyrocketing higher as oil skyrocketed higher. And then we can see right here is where the Russia-Ukraine conflict started, the war started. And what we can see is that gasoline had been ripping higher until here. And then we had the Russia-Ukraine invasion, and it went a little bit higher. So for them to blame the cost of oil, energy, or gas on this war is absolutely absurd. Let's take a look at another thing. Now, back to the CPI, or the CPI that I like to call it, one of the biggest inputs into that CPI basket is, as they say, shelter, your house. Now, they don't look at home prices because, of course, home prices have gone up crazy. What they do is they say it's a rent equivalent. So I'm a homeowner. They would say, hey, homeowner, how much could you rent your house for before, and how much could you rent your home for now after? Now, I am a homeowner, and they've never asked me that question. So I don't know who they're polling or where they're getting their data from, which again is why I say it's heavily manipulated and it's a CP lie. But let's take a look at this here. You can see on my screen, this is rent.com. And so rent.com has this. They say, This is a monthly look at average rent price trends across the United States. Now, if I jump back over here, remember they told us that it says shelters climbed 5% over the past year, 5% to mark the largest increase in 40 years. But per rent.com, which I seem to trust a little bit more than what the government's telling me, what I can see here is that nationally, national average rent price trends went up 25%, not 5. 25%. And if I dig in, it can get even worse. So here's one bedroom city average rent price trends. And we can see Long Beach, California, Southern California, where I'm at, up 56%. Chandler, Arizona, 50%. Amarillo, Texas, 46%. Huntington Beach, again, Southern California, 45%. On and on and on. So they're telling you it's 5%? CPI, right? To my point, 25% year over year. We can see 2 bedrooms have gone up even more. Here in Fresno, again, California, 71% increase, not 5%. Huntington Beach, California, 55%, and on and on and on. Now, the reason why this is important is because, as I said, this rent makes up a large percentage of the CPI basket. So if they put this in factually, we wouldn't be in at 8.5%. We'd be at 10%, 12%, maybe even 15%. All right. Now, I do want to point out one thing to you, and that is that, as I've said many times before, if you watch my videos on a regular basis, then you know that there is no such thing as the real estate market. Instead, there's thousands of real estate markets or sub-real estate markets that are broken up by location and price and property type and so many other factors. And the reason why I want to bring this up is, as I'm looking at this chart, what I can see is that Long Beach rents went up 56%, but in Kansas, they actually went down by 20%. In Chandler, Arizona, they went up by 50%, but in Toledo, Ohio, they went down by 18%. And so you can't just look at the real estate market, whether you're buying or renting or trying to choose a place to live. You want to make sure you're digging in and looking at that granular data, and this really illustrates it. Here we can see Fresno on 2 bedrooms went up 71%, but here Scottsdale, Arizona went down by 18%. And even here, so these two, Fresno and Huntington Beach, went up by 71% and 55%. But in the same area here in California, we have Anaheim, California, that went down 10%. So even in the same geographic area, I mean, all 3 of those locations are within a couple hours of each other, and we went up 71% and down 10%. And so remember, real estate is not the market, it's broken up by sub-markets. Now, I want to talk about what comes next. All right. Now, what is the Fed going to do about this? So they said, as they said in this article, that it was because of their easy money policies, not like Jen Psaki's telling you, which is the Putin price hike. No, it's their easy money policy. So what can they do about this? If they stop printing, if they stop these easy money policies, then it looks like the markets could crash. So they need to do 2 things. One, they need to stop the easy money policy, stop putting so much money into the markets. The other thing they need to do is they have to raise rates. Now, you've been hearing about this since November of last year. They started talking about raising rates. Of course, at the last Fed meeting, the FOMC meeting, they did, in fact, raise rates, and the markets have not been liking it. But what we can see here, if you look at my screen here, we can see Paul Volcker. He worked for the Reagan administration. The reason why we look at this is because, remember, rates haven't been this high since when? Since Reagan was in. And so what happened during that time? Well, Reagan had Paul Volcker working for him. He was the chair of the Federal Reserve. So today the chair of the Federal Reserve is, of course, Jay Powell. Paul Volcker was there. And we can see that the Volcker shock, they call it, the Volcker shock raised the Fed funds rate to its highest point in history to end double-digit inflation. All right, now, how high was it? Well, in order to raise it as high as he did back then in relation to where we're at, we would have to go up so high that it would blow your mind. I'm not even going to give you that number, but we can see here that Volcker fought greater than 10% annual inflation rates with contradictory monetary policy and courageously raised the Fed funds rate to 20%. So he had 10% inflation. He raised rates to 20%. We have 8.5% inflation. That means he'd have to raise it to at least 16%. Most likely to get over 20% in order to get a handle on it. So all of this Fed, we're going to raise it, a quarter point. We're going to raise it half a point. It's going to do nothing. We're going to need a 10% move in order to do that. We can see here that it says that extreme and prolonged interest rate rise was called the Volcker shock, and quote, it did end inflation. Unfortunately, it also created the 1981 recession. So because rates went up so high, nobody could service the debt. Nobody could borrow money. There was no growth. Corporations weren't able to roll over the debt. Now, what's important to understand is that this was a couple years after coming out of the gold standard. So at this time, we'd only created a little bit of debt. We didn't have that much. Unlike today, we have now an unsustainable level of debt. We are up to over 130% debt to GDP. That's the gross domestic product of the country divided by the amount of debt that we have. Now, when a nation gets over 90% debt to GDP, it's kind of game over at that point. That means that every new dollar they add doesn't give them a dollar's worth of growth. When they get over 130% debt to GDP, no nation has ever come back from that. And so here we are at about that level. And so again, back in 1980, we didn't have that level of debt. And so while it was bad, while it was extremely bad, while it led to a massive recession, they didn't have this level of debt that we have today. And so in order to get to those levels today would be in a complete implosion of the system. And so what can they really do to tame inflation today? Well, unfortunately, the Fed is stuck between a rock and a hard place. As we say, the proverbial rock and a hard place. If they continue to stimulate these easy money policies, as this article cites, then unfortunately, inflation is going to continue to rage on. Now, if they stop these easy money policies and they raise rates, maybe they could get a handle on inflation. Maybe. I say maybe, but honestly, it's not very likely. And the reason why is because what happens at the end of these long-term debt cycles, where we're at right now, has happened all the time. When nations go broke, when there's too much debt, what comes next is war. It's always war that comes next, which is exactly where we're at today. Not only do we just have this prolonged war against this pandemic, I'm not going to say the word, now we have a war with Russia and Ukraine. It's always what comes next. But what is the cause of that, or I should say, what is the result of that, is what the big problem is we have today. So we have this war that we're going into. We have this situation where the United States has basically just killed the trust in the dollar. They've seized Russia's bank accounts, if you will, taken their FX reserve, kicked them out of the SWIFT banking system, and even has killed their SDR reserves, which are from the IMF. So at this point, no nation in the world can trust their money, their reserves, to be stored in the bank, FX reserves, or even in the SDRs. So what are they going to do? Well, they're going to have to hold gold. They're going to have to hold oil, gas, or real things, real commodities. How does the world move forward in a world like that? Well, not very good. Larry Fink, who is the CEO of BlackRock, which is the world's largest asset manager, he's somebody you should be paying attention to. He's a globalist. He's an ESG maximalist. He has come and changed his tune in about a week or two ago. He said that this is the end of globalization. So, since 1971, we've printed massive amounts of money, which we've seen the monetary supply go up. The Fed has managed to hide a lot of that inflation because at the same time, we've been globalizing. We've been sending all of our manufacturing overseas, all of the service jobs overseas that pay very low rates. And so as we've had inflation, we've had deflation because of the globalization. However, if Larry Fink is right, and I agree with him, he is, this is the end of globalization. This fits into my 3 cycles thesis I've been talking about. On a 250-year time frame, we have a revolution where the world goes from centralization to decentralization. Editor, let's go ahead and link up that video here on the end of globalization on the 250-year time frame. But what happens next is end of globalization, meaning supply chains start breaking down, nations start trying to hold their own money. We can't move it around easily inside of a banking system. We'll bring back onshore manufacturing. And what does that mean? That means prices go higher. Instead of stuff being made cheap overseas, now it's going to be made onshore and for much more expensive prices. Under that system, that means even more inflation, because we'll be paying higher prices. Now, like I said, we've been able to hide this mass amount of money printing, this inflationary monetary policy. We've hidden that because of the deflation that the world's been going through with globalization. However, if the world deglobalizes and we have inflation, how can the Fed, how can the central banks continue printing money in that environment? The answer is they can't. they can't. And so what we're witnessing is the end of the current monetary regime, monetary system that we have today. As I like to say, the world that we're going into is not not the same as the one we're leaving behind. And if the Fed thinks they're going to be able to stop this inflation at 8.5%, they are sorely mistaken. So to sum that up, be prepared for higher prices. Be prepared for them to blame it more on war and Putin, but you know the truth. You've seen the charts, you've seen the numbers, but let me know what you think. Do I got it right or am I seeing it wrong? I'd love to hear your opinion in the comments down below. Also, I want to say that getting this right, being able to survive this transition is a make or break for me. It's a make or break for you. If you get this right, it could be the greatest opportunity of your life. However, if you get it wrong, it could be destruction for you, your life savings, and your family and your legacy. Which is why I'm having a live event where I'm bringing 15 of the top experts in the world to come tell you what they think is going to happen and what you should be doing about it. I'm talking about marketdisruptorslive.com. There's a link down below if you'd like to come check it out. I got Luke Grauman coming, George Gammon coming, Harry Dent, Daniel DiMartino Booth, Greg Foss, Larry Lepard, Jeff Booth, Robert Breedlove, and so many others. If you want to find out what to do over the next couple years with your money so you don't lose it all, then check it out, marketdisruptorslive.com. Of course, as always, give me a thumbs up on this video if you like it. And if you don't like the video, that's okay. Give me a thumbs down, but at least leave me a comment and let me know why. All right, and that's what I got for you today. All right, to your success. I'm out.